This has been a interesting few days. It always is for me, because on October 31st, Halloween, I'd share with some people over in the thrift store, is always an interesting day, because while I love the children and the candy and the whole bit, I told the story here some years ago of a young honor student at Swarthmore who committed suicide in the church I pastored in Delaware on Halloween. And his sister, who was at Lycoming College in Williamsport, asked that I be the one to come and get her after I had told her brother had committed suicide. It's interesting, she maintains a Facebook page, and we will always be linked. And we have this understanding that way. It's an emotional link through the years. My dad then, on November 1st, years ago, died on All Saints' Day. And then 4 years ago, my mom died on All Souls' Day, November 2nd. And so as I come to this time, as the Mexicans celebrate and grieve the Day of the Dead, all 3 days, I come carrying that with me, which is why All Saints Sunday for me is a time of not so much grieving, but rather claiming some hope. So before we get to the text, please let me move forward and visit again. Now, all of you raised Roman Catholic, this is all old news. You know all this, I'm sure. But for the rest of us, let's review some of the canonization process for the official saints. All Saints' Day is set aside to remember the saints, particularly the canonized or beatified ones. The early church had no understanding of sainthood officially. None. The early church, as we have found prayers and records, apparently in the earliest days would name those who had been martyred, those who were leaders, the apostles, and honor them. But there was no sophisticated process of canonization. The first official saint to be canonized, and I wish Georgia and Paul were here today, because I think they would be proud to know this in terms of their possible family history. The first official saint was venerated 10 centuries after Jesus in 993, when Pope John XV declared Ulrich of Augsburg a saint. If one gets sainted, you may wonder, so does that mean you get a gold card and the keys to your own private washroom in heaven? Well, not quite. But your name does get called in places in public prayers on certain days as an intercessor. You get included in the great catalog of saints, the who's who, if you will, of saints. Sometimes you get churches dedicated in your honor. There's St. Mark's and St. Barnabas and St. Stephen's and St. Matthew. Well, you know all of those churches that you could probably call off. I truly am sorry to bring that up, St. Leonard, because you only got a social hall named after you. It's my belief that Shirley should get credit for half of that sainthood. There's also feast days that were named after various saints. You may become a relic, some of us already have. And even pictures or paintings are displayed with that halo above your head. I'm waiting for when you hang my picture somewhere. So how does one get sainted as we cover this important ground? Well, miracles are very important here, so pay attention. If you get martyred for your faith, that's the hard way, by the way. If you lose your head, then you get a heads up on others. But if you die naturally, you need at least 2 post-mortem miracles to be canonized. So let's finish this definition stuff up. What is a miracle, you might say? Well, if you fall short on the healing stuff, then you must fall back on phenomena. People get healed when calling on your name during an intercessory prayer. That gets consideration. incorruptibility. That is, that after you die, as your body starts decomposing, that it goes very slowly. Years ago, when I was on my sabbatical with a Lilly grant, Anna was very, very young, and we went to the Basilica San Domenico in Siena, and she was quite fascinated that in the church they had somebody's head displayed, St. Catherine's head, who decomposed slowly, it was said. And I thought, well, that's nothing. We preachers have our heads displayed all the time. Liquefaction. No, I didn't say liposuction. Liquefaction. That is, your blood annually liquefies. You could also have the odor of sanctity. That is, as your body rots, it takes on a sweet smell. That was said to be the case with St. Teresa of Avila. There are also miracles that occurred during the saint's lifetime, like levitation. St. Joseph of Cupertino was known to levitate during his sermons. And so if anybody sees me levitating, get your cameras. I want documentation. Stigmata. St. Francis of Assisi wrestled with the devil apparently more than once. But when he wrestled with the devil in a cave near Laverna, he was left with stigmata, the marks of Christ. Oh, one more, I think. Bilocation. And that's when one person is known to have been at two places at the same time, something that's expected of many of us. Padre Pio, one of the later saints, very popular in Italy, was known to pull that miracle off. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that you have to strive. And striving takes quite a bit of work to be an official saint. And for those of you who aspire to strive, I want to lift up, if you're a member here, there's one other problem you have, and that is it's reserved for Roman Catholics. Anglicans have saints too. Their list is a little different, but and the process is a little different. I'm somewhat uncomfortable with the whole idea of canonized saints, and you're saying, well, sure you are. You've been raised a Protestant. But as I read the scriptures, God appears to be more into democratization of saints, a sainthood in which we are all holy because of God's work in Christ, that not of our own. We call it grace, amazing grace. It's about a God thing. My cousin Dot, oh my, she was quite an alto in her day, who sung gospel music like few professionals that I've ever heard. She'd had a serious encounter with Hodgkin's disease so many years ago, before today's technology was as it is now. She had a big family. The church prayed. She suffered. But in the end, she lived. There was one gospel song that had an alto lead. Because of her experience with death and her delight with life, Dot would stand there with one leg a little bit in front of the other, and she would lean back on her right heel, and she would look up toward the heavens, actually the roof of a church, and then she would sing with chills. I mean, would cause chills to run up and down my body, because she sang and she saw what I could only imagine in some way. Looking for a city where we'll never die, there the sainted millions never say goodbye. There we'll meet our loved ones and our Savior too. Come, O Holy Spirit, all our hope renew. And when she sung, there was this angelic smile on her face, surrounded by people in the church who were in tears. Whatever she saw in that city of God, I've come to see through the years in my time in the church and my time beyond the church. Because Doc could see those saints, shapes and sizes, didn't matter, all kinds of colors, gender, ethnicity, and while it would be almost impossible for her to get there theologically, I would say people of different orientations as well. That's what the city on the hill looked like for her. That's what I have come to see the city on a hill looking like today. A city filled with saints of all shapes and sizes. Zacchaeus in today's text, an unclean tax collector. Unclean ritually and unclean because of what he did, who sold out his neighbors by working for the Roman occupation force. A man not only seen to be unclean, but vile, small of stature to boot. He hears about Jesus is coming into the village. Who knows whether it's curiosity or hope or what it is, but he goes looking for this Jesus. There's so much excitement, so many people, so he climbs a tree. He's taken back. Because not only does he see this Jesus, but he sees this Jesus walking toward the tree which he's climbed. Jesus walks up to the tree and finds that Jesus not only sees him, acknowledges him, but announces to him that he's going to be Jesus' host for the day. Zacchaeus repents. He turns. And here's the thing. In terms of the Greek use of the verbs here, it's not he's going to do so-and-so, but he says, I'm giving it away. All my ill-gotten gains, I'm giving it away, and I'm giving away more. Because he was changed in that moment of grace. Saint Zacchaeus must be among that great cloud of witnesses as we ponder the work of the Spirit today. And it brings us the question, what is a saint supposed to look like? Are we supposed to look like him? Or are we supposed to look like that murdering Pharisee, Saul, who would oversee the martyrdom of the first great saint, the deacon Stephen? Yes, he did great work in his missionary journeys as the Apostle Paul, and he traveled and founded the Gentile churches all across the region. Yes, that's true. But prior to that, he caused incredible havoc and pain and suffering. Are we supposed to look like that temperamental, Jesus-denying, sword-swinging Peter, who could never get his answers lined up with Jesus prior to Easter? Are we supposed to look like Martha, who waited tables and provided hospitality for Jesus and his disciples while her sister Mary sat on her behind and got blessed by Jesus for it? Are we supposed to look like Albert Schweitzer, whom the church would not allow to go as a missionary because they suspected that his beliefs were too out of line with orthodoxy, but he agreed to go and serve as a medical missionary in the deepest parts of Africa, unwilling to teach so that his suspicious doctrines would not be spread among the Africans. Are we supposed to look like Mother Teresa, who continued laboring with those impoverished, marginalized, poor people long after her spiritual life was a wasteland? Are we supposed to look like Dorothy Day, who founded the Catholic Workers' Movement and fought as a socialist, by the way, for the poorest of the poor, and was in prison for protesting at the White House, standing up for the women's right to vote? founded hospitality houses for the poor. And by the way, recently was named by the Pope as one of the 4 greatest Americans. Do any of these people look like saints to you? For me, All Saints Sunday is about those sainted millions. Those who have gone before us, by and through the grace of God. Those who were severely broken and abused, even tormented. That's why I do put in the call to worship St. John Coltrane. Broken, but later in life experiencing some moment of grace. St. Johnny Cash, and yes, even St. Dorothy Day. This is a day to honor those saints who all look different, and some radical, and some strange. To honor them. Why? Because God understood long before we would come up with mottos what it really looked like to recycle and reuse and repurpose those whom God had made, even those most flawed. I would offer this word of hope. On those days, when you're down in the dumps so far that you have to reach up to tie your shoelaces, and you're down on yourself harder than those who would criticize you and just bash you and say you can't do anything right, and you're down on the world situation as if it can't get any worse for you, and yet it has been in different ages and times. You remember this. There are those sainted millions who doubted more than you can ever doubt, struggled more than perhaps you will ever struggle, mourned more than perhaps you can even imagine. Those who self-medicated themselves almost to the point of death and hurled themselves against the powers that be, and then had to cry out in the midst of their loneliness, my God, why have you abandoned us? You remember those saints. And lift up your head in thanksgiving. Because as the writer of Hebrews says, there is a great cloud of witnesses. And so on those days when you struggle, so know that that great cloud of witnesses, that communion of saints, if you will, they're pulling for you. You hold firm. Claim the good news of God's miraculous grace. For in the end, it is our hope of being made whole. And this flawed pastor is counting on someday this holy God truly making me whole. For all the saints who from their labors rest, they all look strange. Thanks be to God.